Hello friends, my name is Emile and welcome to the Season 4 premiere of my Forza Top Gear Lap series. So, I mentioned in the last season that things would be a little bit different this time round, and well, as you can probably see now, they definitely are, because for the first time ever, Forza Top Gear Laps takes on the rain. Now, the rain adds its own set of challenges when it comes to Top Gear, and the rain in Forza Motorsport 6 is a very difficult thing to contend with, as I will show you with this first lap. It's a Porsche 911 996 GT3 I'm taking around here, 381 horsepower, 3,160 pounds of weight. Now, the first thing you'll notice is it is very, very, very wet. This is a usual summer day in England here at Top Gear, but there we go. Anyways, through this first section, it isn't too much different from the standards course. Sure, the rain surface is a little bit slippy, but it isn't too much different. The first major obstacle is here. You'll see that big puddle there. It basically means that I have to take the inside line going through there. Also, I can't dip a wheel on the curb because as soon as I rejoin the track, I will slip everywhere. There's another huge puddle down there, which can be an issue, and also at the Hammerhead entrance there is one, so I sort of have to dive off the track a little bit. There is a puddle in the middle of a Hammerhead, but it isn't too much of an issue, and just coming out of Hammerhead as well, there's another puddle, but again, I usually end up missing that one when I'm coming out there. Anyways, through the Hammerhead, it is a little bit more slippy through the Hammerhead than it usually would be. Cars will scrub off about 5 miles per hour less than they would do in the previous series. There is also a massive puddle coming out of the follow through, so I basically have to come off the power when it comes to that. There's another big puddle there. It isn't too much of an issue if you run through that one though. The puddles, in case you're wondering, do actually make the car aquaplane quite badly, so you do want to avoid the puddles at all costs. Anyways, now that you know how the track is set up, let's start throwing some cars around. We start with a Lotus 211, 252 horsepower, 1,642 pounds of weight. This is the lightest car here today, and in Season 3 and 2, this car has surprised. Now, I was kind of curious about sort of track cars like this. When it's come to Top Gear in the past, these ultimate track cars have been extremely quick. The Aerial Atom was in the top 10. For the previous season. The BAC Mono was in the top 30 odd. So yeah, they usually do particularly well, and they have extremely lightweight. They don't have too much power, but they're usually rear wheel drive as well. And I was kind of curious to see how they would cope in the rain, because with lightweight and rear wheel drive, it does show that they could get punted around a little bit. The 211 wasn't quite as easy to drive as it once was. It isn't a bad car by any stretch of the imagination. The 211 is a pretty decent handling car. It's not quite as good as, say, the Mono or anything like that, but the 211 is still pretty darn decent. And to be honest with you, it coped with Top Gear relatively well. If it did get in the puddles, then it was a bit of a disaster. But nevertheless, it wasn't too bad, to be honest with you. Even on rain, the 211 still manages to maintain decent grip. Next up, we have our only supercar for today. This is a Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera, 562 horsepower, 3,470 pounds of weight. This is the most powerful vehicle here today, by quite a decent margin. So, this was another car I was sort of interested in, four-wheel drive cars. Now, on paper, the four-wheel drive cars around here should be better than the rear-wheel drive cars. At the original Top Gear, the four-wheel drive cars usually did do better than the rear-wheel drive cars. However, in the rain, due to the fact that they have, more wheels to put power to, it does stand to reason that they would probably do a bit better because they have more traction. However, the issue with four-wheel drive cars, of course, is that you can get understeer. The Gallardo is a little bit understeery. I've driven this car before, and the Gallardo is always a little bit more understeery than, say, the Huracan. It still isn't a bad car by any stretch of the imagination. It's still pretty decent to drive. It makes an absolutely amazing noise, as you'd expect, of course. It's got that amazing Lamborghini V10 engine in it. But yeah, I will say this car got chucked around a bit less than the 211 did through the puddles. However, I did see myself taking a bit less corner speed with the Gallardo, just because it's so slippy, and the slippiness can actually induce understeer, which was kind of surprising. A car that would really write that home for me is the Audi RS5, which is another four-wheel drive car we have here today. 442 horsepower, 3,830 pounds of weight. This is actually the heaviest vehicle here today. The RS5 is once again all-wheel drive. Unlike the Lamborghini, however, which has minimal amounts of understeer, the Audi is known for having relatively mild amounts of understeer. It isn't known for being the best car to drive, this one, and well, on Top Gear, it kinda showed. Yeah, you really had to scrub speed off in the RS5 if you wanted to survive in the wet, otherwise you just understeer quite horrifically. It wasn't the best car to drive in the world. It never usually is. The RS5's a decent enough car, I guess. The issue with the RS5 is basically the competition it has is much better than it. For example, the RS4 Avant is much better handling. The RS6 Avant is a much quicker car. It sort of has competition within its own brand, and that's before we even extend to the massive amount of GT cars on offer here in Forza 6. Yeah, I was struggling with understeer when it came to the RS5. Through here, I almost went round the puddle there. Again, going through the puddle there actually doesn't really make that much of a difference, and even across this start line here, there's a big puddle there. It doesn't really make a difference. Also, in case you're wondering, actually getting the cars off launch isn't that much more difficult either. It seems like the puddle, aquaplane, everything only really kicks in after a certain speed. Anyways, we now look at a Chevrolet Camaro SS, 455 horsepower, 3,672 pounds of weight. Now, I was interested to see how the muscle cars would do. You see, while four-wheel drive supercars might not have been so affected by the rain, muscle cars would definitely be in contention too. Of course, they have a lot of power, they have relatively simple setups. It stands to reason that these cars could actually not cope particularly well when it came to the rain. And as far as cars going around the track, these could be the one that lose the most amount of time. The Camaro SS is a car that I don't really like to drive anyways. I find it to drive very much like an old car, to be honest with you. It drives like a 90s sports car. It's a little bit too slidey for me. The suspension is a little bit archaic, and on top of that, I'm not a huge fan of Chevrolet Camaros to begin with. Also, cockpit mode in this car is utterly horrendous. That's another thing I also had to contend with. Because I drive in the interior view, or the cockpit view, it's a lot harder to see in the rain, because of course you've got the wipers going, and the rain will constantly block up your vision. And that can get a little bit difficult. With the Lotus 211, in case you're wondering, because that doesn't have a windscreen, the water droplets actually appear on the screen itself. While it isn't too big a deal, it is still a factor. Speaking of muscle cars, I thought I'd have a go with a really old muscle car, the Shelby Cobra. 425 horsepower, 2,350 pounds of weight. This thing doesn't weigh much at all. Now, the Cobra actually went round kind of recently. In Season 3, it was in one of the last episodes, and the Cobra was ludicrously slidey. I will say this car is a huge amount of fun, as I get a massive tail slide through there. This car is a huge amount of fun to drive. Sure, it's very quick as well, it just doesn't go around corners very well, and I was kind of curious to see how much the rain would actually affect the Cobra. And I've got to be honest, I was pleasantly surprised. Because the Cobra is so horrifically slidey on the dry, in the wet it actually doesn't make all that much more difference, to be honest with you. Sure, it does lose a bit of speed through the corners. Sure, obviously it is losing a bit of traction, but unlike in cars like the RS5, where the loss of traction is very notable, in the Cobra, it isn't really all that noticeable because this car didn't have much traction to begin with. I do manage to slide it through the follow-through. That was quite scary. In fact, that was very, very scary, and going on that puddle as well, it was also scary. You'll see me use a combination of both brakes and just lifting off the throttle around that puddle. In the sorts of slower cars, I can probably full throttle it through that puddle, no problem. If you full throttle it in the more higher powered cars, you'll just go straight off the track. So it really is a balancing game. Anyways, another drivetrain configuration I was interested in seeing how it would cope is the front-wheel drive cars, and I decided to go for this Vauxhall Corsa VXR to test out the front-wheel drive cars. 189 horsepower, 2,652 pounds weight. This is unsurprisingly the least powerful car here today. Now, I'm not actually too sure on what the Corsa VXR drives like on the dry. It didn't go around in Season 3. To be brutally honest, I really cannot stand Vauxhall Corsas, so that's why I thought A, it would be a perfect fit for this, and B, it would also sort of give me a bit of an indication of how front-wheel drive cars can handle. As far as I know, on the dry, this thing isn't the best. And on the wet, well, this thing really struggled. Front-wheel drive cars have never done particularly well at Top Gear. It's usually around the hammerhead that you lose a lot of time. However, with the rain being what it is, this car lost so much traction. I don't think the Corsa is a particularly good handling car to begin with. At least from what I can sort of get from driving it in the wet, it definitely isn't. And you can really feel the front wheels skip for grip here. They just can't do it. You have to be kind of cautious through corners, otherwise you are just going to understeer widely off. It doesn't also help that this car has a bit of a differential issue. It also didn't help that, at least in this VXR, the rev counter wasn't actually working in the interior, which was interesting. I don't know why. I guess that's just a bug in the game, but it's still, I guess, they're accurately representing Vauxhall quality. There you go. But anyways, the Corsa VXR wasn't much fun to drive. Finally today, we have another hot hatch. This is a Volkswagen Golf R32, 241 horsepower, 3,256 pounds of weight. So with the front-wheel drive hot hatch not being particularly good, I was kind of curious to see how a four-wheel drive hot hatch would fare around the course. Now the Golf R32, again, this is another car that never actually went round in Season 3. So we haven't really got any dry track data to go from on this vehicle. Again, this is another vehicle I haven't particularly driven in dry all that much either. The R32 though is usually a decent enough handling car. It hasn't got all that much power. The front wheel drive system in this is pretty solid. Of course, it's an Audi system. It is a little bit more biased towards understeer, as you'd probably expect, but it's still a decent enough handling car. The R32, I've got to be honest, it was actually pretty darn decent. There was a little bit of understeer here. Again, I don't think the wet track really helps it out with that. But the R32 certainly isn't bad. Straight line speed-wise, isn't the best. But then again, when it comes to Top Gear now, you know, how much of a factor is straight line speed really going to be? Because around the old Top Gear, you'd find, you know, your straight line speed cars, your Veyrons, your Venoms, stuff like that, would do relatively well. However, in the wet, will they simply lose too much time through the corners? Only time will tell, of course. We still have hypercars and all sorts to throw around, and of course during this season we will throw all sorts of wonderful, magnificent cars around. But there you go. Anyways, onto the actual leaderboard itself, and the Gallardo Superleggero was the fastest car of the day with a 121.817. It beats the Lotus 211, which isn't actually too far off, with a 121.898, which is kind of surprising. 996 GT3 gets a 124.488, and the RS5 gets a 126.502. Chevrolet Camaro SS goes into 5th with a 127.428. Shelby Cobra goes into 6th with a kind of unsurprising 129.492. Golf R32 goes into 7th with a 132.022. And finally, the Corsa VXR. It was the lowest PI car here today, 136.007. Anyways, comparing those times to what the cars did in the dry, and the Lambo did a 116.037 in the dry and a 121.817 in the wet. That's about a 5.8 second difference. Lotus, 116.557 in the dry. It was actually 0.5 seconds off of the Lambo. In the wet, though, it managed to close that gap quite significantly and only lost 5.3 seconds. The Porsche lost just 4.8 seconds. It got a 119.620 in the dry and a 124.488 in the wet. That is a very good handling car. Audi 121.851 in the dry, 126.502 in the wet. Surprisingly enough, that was the car that lost the least amount of time today. Camaro 121.970 in the dry, 127.428 in the wet, lost 5.5 seconds. And the car that lost the most time today, the Cobra, lost about 6.2 seconds in all of that. So, as I suspected, the muscle cars are the ones that lose the most amount of time. However, not really by much. So as far as we can work out here, as far as how much time the cars are going to lose being in the wet, it's roughly around 5 seconds. So I'm very excited for this season. I'm curious to see what will be at the top of the leaderboard come the end. Will the Koenigsegg 1-1 be able to reclaim gold? Or will a four-wheel drive hypercar maybe be able to claim it? Because of course, the Koenigsegg 1-1 is actually mid-engine rear drive. All those questions and more will be answered in the future. This season might not be quite as long as Season 3, just because Season 3 went on for a little bit too long, but we are still definitely going to throw around a fair few cars in our times. So anyways, friends, hopefully you enjoyed this season premiere. As always, if you've got cars you'd like to see featured, or episode ideas that you have, please leave them down below in the comment section, and I'll get around to them shortly. Anyways, friends, I want to thank you all very much for watching. My name's been The Real Emile. Until next time, farewell.